So I think there's this sort of interesting, bigger picture kind of ethical question that sort of stems through a lot of this really interesting research you discussed. I think we talked about it a little bit in our past interview. But so for example, I was recently listening to this podcast, Reply All. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's fantastic. Sanguinant Media would 100% recommend. It's delightful. But they did this episode on they're called tulpamancers. So there's this great Vice article in a New York Times op-ed that discussed people who basically, like, through sheer force of will, kind of create imaginary beings into existence, who sort of like live in their heads with them. And it's this really interesting, it's something I kind of want. So for obvious reasons that we're going to discuss.
What is it called?
So they're called tulpamancers, and the entities they create are called tulpas. I guess it's based on, I think, some ancient Tibetan tradition or something. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's something. There's a lot of cool, interesting stuff you can read about it. And I want to handle this delicately, kind of for the reasons we're about to discuss. Like, I think it's kind of easy to make fun of them because there are some of these people. They say they have like robot cats who, in My Little Pony characters who are living in their brains with them. But they say they're just as real as you are. They have consciousness. They can take over my body sometimes when I let them. As a sort of less extreme example, even something like dissociative identity disorder, where, a few decades ago, there were, only a few cases. On average, they only had one or two multiples. Whereas now, there are like tens of thousands of cases who on average have like dozens. Some even say they have hundreds or thousands. People that they're, saying inhabit their bodies with them. So when you're looking at something like tulpas or dissociative identity disorder or penis theft or voodoo death, there's an obvious sort of dismissive way you can talk about it where it's like, well, yeah, it's obviously not real. Like, obviously there isn't a robot cat living in your brain. Obviously your penis isn't disappearing. Obviously you're not voodoo cursed. But it does seem like in a very tangible way, which I don't want to sort of minimize or be super flippant towards, it does seem real to the people who are experiencing it. I don't want to say it's not real in terms of they're making it up. So I'm wondering, like, in terms of people who are like writing and thinking and discussing about this sort of stuff publicly, is there like a way to responsibly say, no, the robot cat in your head probably isn't real, without sort of minimizing what they're experiencing, or while sort of sensitively discussing it? Or even just, as scientists, is there a way to say, no, there aren't robot cats in people's heads, while still sort of, with sufficient respect and consideration handling? And I think it's like a thorny ethical issue that I haven't quite 100% figured out where I stand yet, and I'm curious to hear what some of your thoughts are.
That is very tricky. It is easy to make fun of those people.
And I really want to resist that urge because that's like, it's too easy. But
for the same reason, it's easy to make fun of like penis stealing, But at the same time, to the person it happens to, it's like deadly serious.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, good example is speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
Which for a lot of the 20th century, a lot of doctors wanted to call a pathology or a mental illness, and except that there's no really negative effects of it, and it's part of somebody's religion, and you can't say to them, and it's the same thing. You can't say, no, you're not really speaking to God or whatever is happening, because to them it's completely real. And so I don't know what the right. I mean, you can always privately feel like it's not real. It's never going to feel real if you're not in it.
Yeah.
But to realize, and maybe just a little bit of humility, to realize that there are things that we believe that are fully 100% real that are maybe not.
But
like for example,
that
PMS is caused by hormonal shifts or something like that. If you tell that to a woman in our culture, they tend to get mad, even though there's a lot of evidence that it's probably not correlated with hormonal levels or things like that. And it's based on an old idea that comes from Hippocrates about women not being able to kind of control their uterus or something like that. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess just to, when you're talking about these weird things and other people's beliefs, to remember that we have our own too.
Yeah, because I mean, I could imagine like if a Nigerian writer came to the U.S. and wrote a book about multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder, kind of along the same vein of like, oh, I was doing this traveling and I met all these people who thought they had like dozens of people living in their heads, and that kind of had me on a soul searching journey to figure out what culture was. Like I could imagine people in the U.S. I think you're in a somewhat unique position where you can talk about this just because the people you're talking about probably aren't going to read the book.
Right.
But like I can imagine, like I could, like, obviously I'm not a woman. I don't experience PMS, but I could imagine there being this sort of kind of annoyed and pissed off reaction where you're kind of like, oh, look, scientists, these like men who are coming here telling me, what I'm experiencing in my own body. Like it's just, the sort of gendered bias in science. Like it's tricky to discuss these things without seeming like you're minimizing the experience so yeah, it's just this interesting and delicate ethical issue that I'm not sure I've figured out how best to handle yet. But I don't know. I mean,
it's a little bit different. It feels a little bit different to me when you're talking about things that have been around for a while and have a long history or something like that than something like this, what you're talking about, that sort of is come out of, like, it's just sort of seems like it's come out of nowhere. But it depends. I guess it depends how you approach it too. It's like as a writer, I have sort of the luxury of approaching it as like, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that's like to have all these cats living in your head, And so to try, and that would be one way to approach it, just to be like, to try to figure out what is that like, and what does that feel like, and what is that sort of experience like, and what's behind that experience. So but. And also, if you were a psychiatrist, maybe your approach would be, well, is this having any negative effects on the person? Is it affecting their life somehow? If not, then whatever. But, I don't know, maybe it's helping them somehow. Who knows? I don't know. It's really hard to speak to other people's reality and what is, and the narrative ecosystem that they feel like they're part of.